I'm going to introduce the first presenter, me. I'm the mad botanist, self-acclaimed. Title of the talk is, What Are We Doing? Botany and Beyond, an evaluation in 5 acts. I normally would speak impromptu. It's easier, but I do not trust myself. I'm a little bit irascible tendency for profanity, and I know in this topic, if I did it impromptu, I would be profane. So I will attempt to keep myself in check somewhat and to make sure that all points that I want to address are covered. I will rely on a prepared text. Forewarning, there will be lots of pronouns, substantial satire and sarcasm, as well as frank speak. The boat needs rocking, and I intend to rock it. Act 1, Reality and Change. These are the 5 acts that I'll be dividing the presentation into. And what I'm attempting to do is to weave a story with 4 lines. The lines are the state of natural history and botany, state of the environment, the condition of collections, and the world, essentially about us. As most of you know, my story, the Mad Botanist story, includes producing natural history publications for the Indiana Academy of Science, the IAS. I've done this work for over 3 decades, starting with Mike Amoya's Orchids of Indiana, and more recently, Wilhelm and Marika's Flora of the Chicago region, as well as Paul Rothrock's long-awaited Carrick's treatise, The Reason We Are Gathered. Yet, while we appreciate the remarkable scholarship, devotion, and insight these wonderful works contain and represent, most people do not care, do not get it. And I'm not just referring to the clerk at the local market or a repugnance of there are bugs in my yard McMansioneers with their lollipop trees, meatball shrubs, and drug-dependent rugs. Thank you, Jerry Wilhelm. No, this so what attitude, sad to say, also applies to many current academic biologists. Which begs the question, what is a biologist? Literally, someone who studies life, living organisms, but there are all kinds of biologists, lots of branches on the tree. For example, ich bin Botaniker. I'm a botanist, mad botanist, if you will, and damn proud of it. The problem is being a botanist, a natural historian, does not mean much in this new world. Yet, not that many years ago, during my adult life, botany and botanists seemed to be at a zenith. Most universities had botany departments where one could get excellent, well-rounded training. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of pruning. The departments are gone, and so are most of the botanists. They are now plant biologists or plant scientists, phytologists, or frequently not at all. It was Eric Blair, aka George Orwell, who said first they steal the words and then they steal the meanings. Well, as regards botany and biology, most universities have gone much further, well beyond semantic shift. I will explain, but I first want to spend a minute elaborating on my previous comment about most people not caring. Many of us are delusional. One of the common delusions among our clan, the nature and plant lovers, is the notion that we're numerous. The reason for the misperception is that our world is who we associate with. Thus, our clan seems bigger, more people than it actually is. And of course, there's the rosy lens of wishful thinking, denial. Alas, we are a micro-minority. Be suspicious of stats like the internet posted 13% of us are nature lovers or enthusiasts. know that the 13% includes all bikers and walkers. Discouragingly, experience leads me to suspect that the real number of devout nature enthusiasts is likely less than 5%. So, why? How can you not be a nature enthusiast? And how do we change the number? Change and control are, forgot to advance one. Where have all the botanists gone? Change. Change or control are issues that I think about a lot, but both are relevant to the talk. For example, occasionally we consider or make a change even when we know it's unnecessary or we transition too soon. The temptation can be too much. Sometimes the scope and momentum are such that change cannot be avoided, inevitable, but we resist, often refusing to acknowledge reality, to enable the denial, and to prevent the shift. Why? Perhaps we think the change is happening too fast, or maybe it's contrary to what we want to believe, or maybe it conflicts with tradition, the norm. And especially because we desire stability and fear uncertainty. There's actually a term for it, mesothesiophobia. It means a fear of change, like metaphase or metamorphosis, change. Not uncommonly, the change cannot be detected until later, or it produces an unintended or unwelcome outcome. And sometimes we're forewarned, but as often as not, we do not listen, preferring instead the blissful ignorance, hoping that it will simply go away. But as the Greek philosopher Heraclitus noted, there is nothing permanent except change, which presents a dilemma since progress is impossible without it. Yet, just because you can does not mean you should. Moreover, the rush for knowledge and the new can be dangerous without wisdom as a guardrail, as can getting the right answer, but asking the wrong question. Direction, Act 2. Starting about 1960, but reaching full throttle in the 1980s, university biology departments chose a new direction. The change started with botany being merged with zoology, a pairing rarely, if ever, favorable to botany. Simultaneously, schools quickly began changing to a biology dominated by avant-garde types, micromolecular and more medically oriented. The primary casualty from this new direction was the already decimated botany. Yet two new breeds, the cladist and phylogenists, have flourished, their work allowing previously impossible insights. But what will become of these ascended confident sleuths once we know the relationship answers? I suspect they will morph into more biometric biochemical types. In fact, many already are, and as Robert Molenbrock noted, phylogeny is just another tool, frequently no more illuminating than morphology, and usually less practical. That is, of limited to no use in the field. Unfortunately, hidebound traditionalists often dismiss the new knowledge without fair consideration. Again, change and a variance from what they were taught, what they want to believe, and what they cling to, sloth-like. Which presents the question, are they seeking to learn to find the truth in a better way? Or are they merely trying to prove an existing belief, what psychologists call confirmation bias? Question, why the reorientation in biology? Simple, botanists, zoologists, and ecologists are less likely to land a big NSF, NIH grant or get massive agrochemical funding from Bayer or Monsanto. Unfortunately, money and prestige are the metrics that matter most to the present-day university captains. The main considerations are, does the endeavor bolster their U.S. News ranking and the dean's coffers? Not whether the research is interesting and important. So, is Sam Kaplan's assessment and justification valid? Kaplan, a microbiologist who was a director of the School of Life Sciences at the University of Illinois during the 1980s, said, "All the alpha biology in the Midwest is already known. You're wasting your time." Answer, it was not then. And as Wilhelm and Marika elucidate in their monumental 2017 tome, we have very much to comprehend at both the macro and micro levels in the Midwest and elsewhere. You see, the biology, the natural history, is far more than names, but the names, the handles, are important, as is studying the interaction, the ecology. Sadly, most universities and the neobiology departments do not recognize this or seem not to care. Although they may keep a token old schooler because the person is tenured in some way significant or connected, perhaps chaired, or they need them to teach the occasional course to look diverse or to be grant qualified. But few of these New Age biologists, plant biologists, know flora. Instead, their research somehow merely involves a plant or plant part. I'm reluctant to refer to them as botanists, certainly not a name that plant useful outside a lab botanist. Silly me, I forgot. Such expertise is unnecessary, and there are apps for the identification. And while I'm on botany, the same diminution applies to zoology. Act 3, consequences. What are we doing and why? One should always attempt to consider the consequences of an action. Unfortunately, frequently we do not or cannot, and start over is often a pipe dream. Fact, there are consequences for modifying the environment. As for the cause, simple, human overpopulation and how we live, greedy, ignorant, poor stewards, a me and now attitude. As Aldo Leopold noted, the modern dogma is comfort, convenience at any cost. Many of us seem to want an exemption from nature. We live less like a potentially reasoned animal. Sapiens, after all, translates to wise one, and more like corporate pawns. Conditioned and addicted to entertainment, content residents of a throwaway society and an insane sports-driven culture obsessed with news and celebrity. Unwilling to objectively assess how we think and act because it would be a revealing exposition. And breaking free from the programming can be extremely difficult. Why? Self-deception, lack of critical thinking, gullibility, little or no self-control, and ignorance. Needing our fix, we cooperate whilst using our big but often underutilized brains to rationalize blindly and reflexively. It's my idea, so it must be good. How can I be wrong? So what? It's what I want. That's all that matters. Everyone else is doing the same thing, not my problem, or I will deal with it later. Really? The magnitude of our environmental problems is such that we can no longer simply ignore or relocate, attempting to escape reality. There are adaptation limits, and there's also a ticking clock. Two consequences of us and our actions are loss of habitat and biodiversity. Interlinked issues many of us worry about. Related, Paul Ehrlich, who 5 decades ago clearly warned of the impending environmental problems from too many people, wonderfully paraphrased Leopold when he said the first rule of intelligent tinkering is to save all the parts. It's a catchy line, but there's a flaw in this wisdom, namely that any organism can live alone. Rachel Carson told us as much. Making the situation more confused, a certain big-name mercenary entomology ecologist tells us all, yes, all we need to do to preserve biodiversity is to plant native species. A facile, one-size-fits-all half-truth that perpetuates the single attribute mistake believed and practiced by many gardeners and misguided, often fascist purists. I had the opportunity to discuss the simplistic all we need to do proclamation with E.O. Wilson in 2018. He concurred that biodiversity is far more complex than planting natives, a topic Jerry Wilhelm and Mike Moya will discuss later this morning. Comrades, there are other factors to consider. Nature's wonderfully complex, and again, nothing lives alone. Many of us are Pollyannas. If it's bad news, we don't want to hear it. Optimistic ignorance, which is not helping. Seems more logical to me to want to know if one's home is in danger, and it is, so that one can at least attempt to prevent or reduce the damage. There is no reset button. And know that focusing on economic growth is exacerbating rather than helping. It's about the environment. It's about time we wake up. The human population is very close to 8 billion and increasing by over 200,000 people net daily, nonstop. It's equivalent to the population of the 16 counties that comprise Chicagoland every 43 days, nonstop. It's the population of California and Canada combined yearly. Moreover, the prediction that the population may stabilize in about 80 years at 11 billion, nearly 50% more than now, should not be comforting. Try to imagine the condition of the biosphere by then. We're not the only thing trying to survive here. Frankly, we probably could have continued living the good life had we kept the population in check, but that ship has sailed and like the Titanic, in peril. In addition, it's idiotic hubris to think anything mankind does ever makes the land better than as we found it. Urban sprawl is a spreading infection by an insatiable, prolific parasite. Yes, we are textbook definition parasitic, as the CDC designated in 2018. Not an apex predator as suggested by the anthropocentric hypermasculine types. Just an animal, a primate, polluting the air and water whilst penetrating and defacing the land with structures connected by a mycelia-like network of transport corridors, which facilitates further spread of us and our spoil. Obviously, we need to deal with the cause, not just the symptoms, but it will not happen of our own volition. Like with so many issues, we deny the facts and lack the courage, refusing to adequately address the problems we cause, because doing so would require significant change in our way of living, would interfere with the corporate setup. La vita ignorante. One of the consequences, as the unforgiving landlady, will soon be delivering some eviction notices. But that's far from the most severe consequence. Reason, the combined effect of allowing the principal, the number of people, to become so large, what Einstein referred to as the most powerful force in the universe, the power of compounding. Again, direction and rate, our fault, our choice, our consequence. Even the great David Attenborough neglected to point out human population directly in the excellent Netflix documentary Breaking Boundaries. Seems the topic is verboten, a conundrum we refuse to treat. Let's be clear. We are facing a global existential threat with dire consequences, here and now. Atonement is inevitable, and the longer we delay, the more severe the punishment will be. The fact that it is happening gradually provides a false sense of security, but the cumulative effect is obvious. Waiting for, relying on techno-salvation or divine intervention, as E.O. Wilson pleaded in 2006 to save the creation, then you are both foolish and delusional. So, Mad Botanist, what does this apocalyptic talk have to do with botany, ecology, and biology departments at university? Answer: we are significantly past the carrying capacity for the way many of us try to live, 4 times past, in the red since 1970, and we need botanists, ecologists, we need behavioral biologists now more than ever to address the problems resulting from the host of critically urgent environmental issues, essentially trying to save us from ourselves. But where will these essential whole organism field biologists be trained, and by whom? Brace yourself here. I once held universities, and the biologists there in supreme esteem. These ivy-clad enclaves were where giants dwelled, a wellspring and sanctuary for natural historians. I think back a few years to the University of Michigan, Howard Crum, Herb Wagner, Ed Voss, never mind Alexander Smith and others, all at the same time. Olympus. Regrettably, at least with respect to biology, most universities have decided to go in a new direction. The allure of modern biology and grant money has caused us to become too focused, ignorant, enamored, and blinded by the shiny new technology, and again, grant money. So who currently occupies the positions once held by Crum, Wagner, and Voss at UM? Not a bryologist, not a pteridologist, not a vascular plant taxonomist. No, the positions were tossed back into the cauldrons and remade by administrators into trendy molecular scientists. Now have whole organism experts and outstanding biologists like Voss et al. Or on university faculty, which is increasingly improbable. They are likely as not emeritus or about to be, or found it necessary to seek refuge in another department or institution, perhaps sporting an adjunct position in their former home, which has been appropriated, cowbird style, their skill set no longer appreciated, deemed archaic and unnecessary, only somewhat useful for the gold mining. Incredibly, even the non-agronomic and once dominant plant physiologists are being hammered by the purge. I understand that one cannot be all things, but the notion that we cannot or should not be doing ecologically oriented and whole organism research and molecular biology at the same university should be ludicrous, especially now. Give a look and know this. The avant-garde bench biologists and their leaders do not consider much of what natural historians do as a relevant modern science. Again, why? They're following the lead of James Watson, who did his undergraduate training here in the late 1940s, who stated, ecology is not very intellectually demanding. Anyone that would hire an ecologist is out of his mind, waste of a tenured position. This is the same fortunate narcissist who E.O. Wilson called the most unpleasant human being I have ever met. I can only add that Wilson obviously never met Miss Pritchett, my high school librarian, or my Aunt Dorothy. To appear pertinent and modern, many schools have chosen to rebrand, selecting more in vogue names like integrative and behavioral biology or something with evolution in their title, unless they're in Alabama or Kentucky or Oklahoma. While I respect the new names and support the implied cross-disciplinary strategy, the emphasis is often still way too medical and molecular, leaving relevant traditional fields underfunded, unappreciated, and usually left out, the proverbial red-headed stepchildren. Alas, the tray chic title often ends up being only somewhat accurate. At least the University of Illinois has the Illinois Natural History Survey on campus. And at Indiana University, zoology has been affected at least as much as botany. The broad coverage, whole organism days featuring the likes of Carl Eigenmann, Alfred Kinsey Gall Wasp are gone. And as Frank Young, Aquatic Beetles, pointed out in his 1983 History of IU Biology, ecology never took a foothold here, although IU recently created the Environmental Resilience Institute. While initially impressed, once I got past the fashionable name, I concluded it's an appeasement, likely a chimera, a novel amalgamation that seems more a business school subset geared to predict and record change than to prevent it, and as one might expect, since it's at university administration heavy, appearing to fill a need to access an available pile of money. You see, universities have allowed themselves to become hijacked by external funding mentality, focus on revenue generation, part of the corporatocracy. Schools perceive the primary purpose of research as to secure funding. Seems grant procurement is now often considered more important than good teaching and scholarly achievement, although these are necessarily given lip service, but less likely tenure. Modern biologists at universities are frequently, in part, little more than highly trained, specialized grant writers. The aphid, with the grant agency being the stem full of rich sap, and the honeydew treasure lapped up by the school. No doubt the extraordinary advances in genetics and computers are principal reasons for the change of direction. So does this make whole organism biology obsolete? Like forensics giving up on fingerprint analysis, absolutely absurd. We should consider using the new tools to enhance the existing or vice versa. Other reasons given for the shift include that molecular work is both easier and sexier. As we know, field biology can be demanding, but also a thrilling and fulfilling and a complex, mystical laboratory. Trying to understand nature's truth by listening and observing, literally bearing witness. Regarding sexier, flowers are all about sex, about replication. Strategies are key to reducing and preventing many types of environmental damage. And I'm not just talking about calorie pear, Asian bush honeysuckle, and feral swine. Open your eyes. We are the damage doers. Contrary to what most economists and psychopathic groups like Quiverful suggest, we do not need and cannot afford more people. To think and act otherwise now is environmental ignorance, utter lunacy. As you are aware, we must be very careful when choosing our leaders, the people who determine the direction and rules. Alas, far too often, the individuals chosen to decide the orientation for biological investigation at university are vision-impaired corporate types. Moreover, I have been told that these New Age commanders are human, that they are sentient, and that their blood is red, but I have no proof. We do know they can count, and they are good liars. But I will attempt to refrain from the urge to say they are frequently incompetent, sycophantic hitmen, but rarely women, ambitious, soulless dullards, incapable of seeing need and opportunity other than how it affects them and their mission. Their mission, oftentimes change merely for the sake of change, or change with little to no improvement. I'm not saying these leaders, these talking and counting heads, are not highly intelligent. Some are. Some are even likable. So why are they disinclined to allow botanists and zoologists to coexist with them? Their disregard and deliberate purging actions are producing what is essentially a KT-like boundary at university for our kind. And they are ignorant. We are facing a live or perish question. How long a system out of equilibrium can continue to function? That system is our habitat, our home. But how are the neobiologists and their supporters contributing? I was told many years ago by my graduate advisor, University of Illinois Malcolm Sargent, that it's very easy to make bad decisions. Bright individuals are not exempt. In fact, the ramifications from their missteps can be more profound. As mentioned earlier, there is no reset option, and not every problem has a solution or one that is palatable. I contend the ship captains, the administrators at IU and elsewhere, have made and continue to make unnecessary, ill-advised course deviation regarding biology, and that the accompanying bias and stenosis neither accommodates a broad-based education nor addresses our acute environmental troubles. But it sure helps bring in bigger grant dollars and bolsters their Carnegie rankings. Carnegie rankings are, by the way, not done at Carnegie Mellon, but here. This myopic view of biology, micro, medical only, please, creates gaps in student training. Want to find out how thin the talent pool has become? Talk to someone who's charged with trying to replace a real botanist or zoologist. The new approach to biology de-emphasizes breadth as evidenced by the courses now offered at most universities, which speaks to the faculty expertise or lack of same. Courses like bryology, mycology, or even morphology are fewer or less frequent, if at all, or now part of a survey class often taught by a non-expert and or without a field component, yet the schools find a way to travel the sports teams all over the country. It's a matter of priority and purpose. There are just a couple of plant courses at Indiana University. Think about that for a minute. Part of IU's goal of no more ologies. Like Yale, they consider this exclusionary action as distinguishing. However, it can be argued, not in a good way. But when I did a recent Google search, and does IU have botany popped up? Unexpectedly, I read the answer. It says IU biology provides a full breadth of biological sciences. In fact, the claim is pure equivocating bullshit. Act 4. Herbaria, collections. Herbaria can be an excellent teaching aid, and it would have been impossible to do the floor of the Chicago region or Paul's magnificent Sedge books without them. But these special libraries of formerly living plants, Watson called them stamp collections, associated with and integral to some plant and environmental sciences are under assault, just like the botanist. Again, micromolecular movement. They want the space and an annulment from what they perceive as a useless accumulation and an anachronistic practice. Their herbaria are being neglected, jeopardized, orphaned, given away, swallowed, pirated, and in some cases, literally destroyed. These collections are particularly vulnerable. 1, during building construction. 2, when a new technology or gimmick is introduced. 3, when there is an administrative change. Or 4, when the curator departs. There's an opportunity then. Allow me to present a few specific examples, many of them revolting. David Brussels was a classmate of mine at EIU. I refer to it affectionately as EIEIU. David, who was a botany faculty member at SIU Carbondale, was working in the herbarium there when he noticed a dumpster full of discarded herbarium sheets. Turns out that an inept curator had thrown away the specimens because they were old. G.H. French specimens from the 1800s. Molenbrock memorialized the incident in the preface of his 4th edition of the Guide to the Flora of Illinois. Purdue has a plant collection, has had since 1847, even before it became a university. But I'm reluctant to say herbarium since that might imply permanent housing. Unfortunately, as sometimes happens, collections get moved around, often without regard to environmental control or security. During one of these interim housings, the plant collections at Purdue were stored in what was at the time the Memorial Gymnasium building. In 1917, Charlie Deem witnessed an Army training unit temporarily housed in the gym use herbarium sheets from the cabinets to provide a clean, dry pathway from the shower room to the living quarters. He never forgave Purdue. Additionally, Nick Hardy, who's with us, was the assistant curator there for over a decade. Recently, he told me that the collection narrowly escaped being taken to the landfill in the 1980s. The botany department chairman, befuddled by what to do with all those cabinets full of old, dried specimens, had them placed on the loading dock to be discarded. An alert old-school professor, Joe Hennon, is credited with the save. More on Purdue in a moment. I immigrated from the Illinois Natural History Survey in 1987 to be a biology curator at the Indiana State Museum. One of my goals was to provide a secure home for the long-standing but neglected herbaria at DePaul and Wabash. I acquired a room full of new specimen cabinets from Interior Steel and proceeded to off-gas them. About this time, I learned that the New York Botanical Garden was in the process of obtaining these collections. I inquired, and they told me to stay away. The material now belonged to them. New York would not allow the specimens collected from Indiana and proximate locations to stay in a regional repository. I'm still troubled by the fact that the pirating was spearheaded by an indifferent native Hoosier, evidently looking to feather her cap. Moreover, their claim, New York's claim, that moving the specimens to the Bronx made them more accessible to botanists most likely to have interest in the Midwestern material was and is absolutely ridiculous. Point of fact, there are numerous Indiana errors in the Flora North America distribution maps done after the transfer. FYI, the biologists at DePaul and Wabash facilitated the purge, and the schools were glad to be rid of the collections as it freed them to do more relevant modern science and more pre-medicine. Know that every herbarium loss also means the loss of at least one botanical position. Butler University has a strong history of botany and ecology, including the excellent but now defunct journal Butler University Botanical Studies. It seemed that Butler was well positioned when in the 1970s a substantial will gift equivalent to $140 million today stipulated the formation of the Holcomb Research Institute and the Institute of Ecology to do environmental assessment. Buzzkill. Less than 20 years later, the university president found a way to circumvent the covenants of the bequeath and terminated the institute, as well as all the associated faculty. The administration wanted the money, not the strings. Sound familiar? Fortunately, the Friesner Herbarium located there was spared because it had different administrative cover. It was separate. There are obvious problems with a single-person setup, be it a traditional library or herbarium like Butler. But there are other problems jeopardizing herbaria. The individuals tasked with the curation not being given adequate credit, no pay, or just assigned work, burnout, or the person was never interested in doing the work, what I call perfunctory curatorship. And as with the SIU example, utter incompetence. Moreover, it is my contention that administrators usually consider curatorial duties menial. What about Indiana University? The herbarium was created in 1885, but I find it hard to believe that there was no archived plant holdings before 1885, since Indiana was founded in 1820. Bear in mind the science building and most of the associated collections were destroyed in an 1883 fire. Regardless, in 1894, botanist and IU president John Coulter, on the right, departed, taking the nascent herbarium, cabinets and all, with him to Lake Forest College. Side note, David Starr Jordan, a prominent ichthyologist and gifted administrator previously at Butler, and who was IU president immediately before Coulter, had done the same thing a few years earlier, when he left Bloomington in 1891 to become the first president at Stanford, taking with him 40% of the faculty and most of the football team. The robber baron Leland Stanford had offered him a per-head bounty. The Indiana Academy of Science was created in 1885. The four-named fish expert, David Starr Jordan, and now ostracized biologist, was the first IAS president. From the beginning, the idea was to create an Indiana counterpart to the Illinois Natural History Survey. But in 1927, about 40 years after it was founded, the IAS abandoned the idea and relinquished all the holdings at all the colleges and universities in state, including Indiana University. Subsequently, Charlie Deem's library and large, remarkable collection, the basis for his 1940 classic Flora of Indiana, was purchased by IU starting in 1931. Fast forward. During the past decade, Eric Knox and Paul Rothrock, that's Eric on the left, but that's not Paul on the right, have done more to modernize the Deem herbarium than any comparable collection that I know of. Their digitization project and the associated Midwest Herbarium Consortium work were massive undertakings, included all the Indiana's vouchers and the nearly 160,000 specimen collection, and involved far more than photographs. But they needed a university grant since the annual extra salary budget for the herbarium is $5,000. Yes, $5,000. That's been the appropriation for over a decade, which falls right in line with the major university thinking that any activity incapable of producing big grant money is unworthy of being at a modern biology department. So how is the university, the biology department, responding to Eric and Paul's awesome effort? Answer: they rejected requests for a budget increase and were dismayed to learn that the work of a current doctoral candidate would increase the holdings, akin to discovering that the unwanted thing had metastasized. I cannot help but wonder if the administration viewed the digitization project as a means to an end, the end of the herbarium, by employing the bogus argument, have been photographed, no longer needed, now can be discarded, fattening with a grant before the slaughter. If there was a policing agency comparable to Children and Family Services, the dependent, in this case the herbarium, might be taken and placed in foster care due to neglect for failure to provide adequate safety and support. Unfortunately, some major universities like Illinois, Missouri, and others have simply given up, transferred, offloaded their herbarium to a major in-state repository, but that option does not exist in Indiana. David Dilcher is a renowned paleobiologist. I recommend the very interesting 2017 Nova special entitled First Flower, which features David. A National Academy of Science member, he was courted by the University of Florida in 1990. David was highly respected, well-liked, and he presumed IU would want to retain him. But this happened near the start of the molecular tsunami, so you may not be surprised by the IU administrative response. If you leave, will you please take your collection with you? He did. After retirement, he moved back to Bloomington, but tellingly, his emeritus office is in geology and water survey, not biology, although biology claims them, of course. When Frank Young retired from Indiana University in 1985, he gave most of his aquatic beetles coleoptera vouchers to Purdue. Young's donation was a boon for Purdue since their world-class entomology collection, housed in the basement, suffered extensive loss a few years earlier due to flooding from a construction mishap. You should never store a collection in a basement. Think indoor swimming pool. Classic space allocation stupidity by administrators, not what one would expect from a place proclaiming the team with brainiacs, but then universities are far more interested in and dedicated to their sporting facilities, their lure for the requisite undergraduate fodder, and the proven way to pacify gifting alumni. By the way, IU had no interest in retaining Young's insect collections. 38 years earlier, they discarded their entire natural history collection, literally threw it away, in what was called the Great House Cleaning. Moreover, shocking and implausible it may seem in this cleaning, the nearly complete skeleton of giant ground sloth, Megalonyx jeffersonii, along with parts of mastodon and mammoths, were literally thrown out the second floor window of Owen Hall into a waiting dump truck. But there's more. Some of you may be familiar, maybe sometime in your training you got to see a picture or a piece of lepidodendron. I doubt that you have ever seen a 15-foot stem of a plant that predates the dinosaurs. If you want to see it now, you have to find the landfill that they used in 1947 for that, along with, oh, what is that in the background? Oh, that's a giant extinct armadillo that's also in that landfill. I have no idea what all the rest of it is. Horrible. No surprise this deplorable act was omitted from Young's sanitized history of IU biology, and the discard was authorized by a microbiologist administrator and a former Indiana Academy of Science president who retired from Indiana the next year. The Dean herbarium stored elsewhere survived the purge, but somehow the Associated Library has been destroyed by mold caused by inadequate housing. Indiana now has by the way, a laser-generated cardboard copy of the giant ground sloth. Given that a herbarium is a biological collection, it's a kind of library and it requires relatively little money to run. The willful disregard and purge from a well-endowed $3.3 billion R1 institute like IU would be an unconscionable action. Hear me. Herbaria are unique historical document repositories and irreplaceable resources, useful for contemporary and future research. Ask historians like IU's renowned James Madison or James Alexander Toms, or detectives investigating cold cases about the importance of old and archived material. And what good is a library without access to the contents or a skilled librarian to do the curation? Act 5, a new paradigm. Many of us are change averse, impulsively holding on to the past, those halcyon days. Surely the situation will improve. Really? When and where? Again, delusional thinking. Moreover, our standard defense regarding botany, whole organism biology, and collections is clearly ineffectual. Enough with the excuses, enough with the ignorance, enough with the pusillanimous justifications. We are facing rapid onset, disciplinary attrition, extermination. Mind you, I'm not impugning the general reputation of Indiana University. Like the University of Illinois, University of Michigan, IU is world-class in many areas, preeminent. Just no longer in whole organism biology. In fact, they cannot field a team, nor do they care. Moreover, if we continue to allow the game to be played by their rules, so will the diminishment. The administrators and New Age biologists do not appreciate what we do, nor do they want to be associated. Expecting them to have an epiphany, a Colonel Nicholson, what have I done woke effect? Don't hold your breath. This marriage, this association failed some time ago. Now, at best, the university, the relationship is tolerance. We need a divorce, and we need custody of the offspring, the herbaria. We need to be free, separate from the bench biologists and administrators who perceive our work to be quasi-biological and who are understandably embarrassed to be around us because we, by comparison, illustrate just how narrow and grant-focused they are. Moreover, we need to rethink the direction, the future of higher education as it relates to environmental issues and whole organism biology. And it needs to be more than an appealing new company name. Like epoxy and paint on a rusted frame, merely cosmetic, having done a lot of construction and renovation in my life, it's better to often start over. Friends, we should seriously consider making some alternative plans. But the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in presents an opportunity. I've been waiting and hoping for a sage university administrator to break from the pack and take advantage of the chance to distinguish their school, to be a focused leader attending to these crises, environmental research and dramatic discipline decline. Unfortunately, they seem unable to resist the siren call of major grant money, pre-med, or the fantasy, some would suggest lunacy, of wanting to be at or like the big U, digging for gold. Blind ambition. I tell you, there's a huge difference between being a leader and having control. So what should be done? What might be done? I took the initiative and outlined a template for a new way forward. This new paradigm is included in your handout. I think you will find the concept and the particulars exciting and would appreciate you giving the plan a look. Institute for Transition Ecology, I look at it as being an interdisciplinary agency, egalitarian, ability-based, environmental assessment, individual and collaborative work, dealing with biodiversity and benchmarking, a collection-friendly environment, and association. I think it's going to be necessary for us to have an association with the Land Trust. Remember, Butler, we had the money once and the money's out there now. I contend the center should be a nonprofit public venture and can be done without any state or government money, thus free from those constraints. Essentially, I propose a new institution, a new way forward. Figuring out how to revitalize land that we have destroyed or in the process of spoiling, while also identifying and helping preserve precious natural areas. Give me some Ponce de Leon water and sign me up. The need is quite obvious. For example, the biometric that should have alarm sounding is the plummeting number of insects. Check the streets of the vehicular grills and windshields in the summer. Something very bad is happening out there. Maybe a new silent spring, perhaps this time due to neonics related to agrochemical monoculture, which is directly attributable to human overpopulation. Some will say, so what? Well, know this, life as we know it is impossible without bugs. The new institute, which could be duplicated in key locations elsewhere, should be interdisciplinary, must include behavioral experts, and while it might be at or near university, it need not be. Collections would be part of the setting, but the institute should clearly not be primarily a museum or survey endeavor. Furthermore, the affiliation with land trust, I think, will prove to be very helpful. We need to think outside the box. Got a better idea? I'm certainly open for hearing it. Ellen Ketterson, who's an ornithologist here, one of the few remaining dinosaurs at Indiana University, last year proposed a center focusing on birds. While that's a good idea, I suggest we need a broader approach to address our environmental plight. Ecosystem science is like baseball. It's a team game. You need more than pitchers. And if the attempted fix is merely a single position here and there, it will not work. Too tenuous and too vulnerable. Besides the emancipation, the divorce, we botanists and ecologists need to do a better job of advocating. We need to rethink and rebrand our work. Why not consider referring to part of what we do as forensics? After all, herbarium specimens are time and condition-specific evidence. Think about that. Herbarium specimens are time and condition-specific evidence. And such, much of the land surface is covered by plants. It seems logical to compare human overpopulation and the resultant damage to a skin infection, disease, or crime scene. The scar tissue visually different with diminished capacity. And we need to realize that not everything can be fixed. We cannot make natural areas intact tissue. That's what natural area is, it's intact tissue. Once gone, never wholly retrievable. Therefore, we need to hyperemphasize prevention and conservation. As the late E.O. Wilson noted, we are running a dangerous course. We have Paleolithic emotions, Middle-Age institutions, and frightening godlike technologies, and we will be facing a point of crisis in the coming decades. Well, that time has arrived. The questions we ask, the direction we take in our answers and actions are critical. We cannot afford to delay. The status quo is unsustainable, nor can we solve our problems by simply ignoring them. Take a hard look. We're in a bad position and sliding. In fact, Humpty has fallen. But attempting to put him together is not a job for a strand of molecular types keen on practicing Frankenstein biology. The bean jar is spilled, but we need to do more than document the rate of spill. We need environmental biologists and assembly recipe research, like Paul's Sedge work and the work in the flora of the Chicago region, to help guide the preservation and attempted restoration and reconstruction. And we need to address the cause, anthropogenic activities. We must act soon, and the action must be great. Towards that goal, we need to have better leadership. We need botanists. We need a home base or bases. And we need herbaria, not just a few multi-million specimen repositories. We need them now, and we will need them in the future. In closing, unless someone like you cares an awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. But caring is not enough. We must act. Statum. We are in a struggle to survive and losing. severe environmental crisis, unable to retreat because there are few places to retreat to. Although unimaginable not that long ago, the neobiologists have taken the Citadel, University of Michigan, whose first professor, Asa Gray, was a botanist. Think about that, first professor at University of Michigan, a botanist, to whom most of the people in this room are in an academic sense genealogically related. But continuation of that lineage is in serious jeopardy. However, as discouraging as the situation may seem, and despite our small numbers, we must not be dissuaded or demoralized. We need resolve. We need a new path. The new institute I propose would serve as a haven and a clinic for environmental research. Doubt the possibility? Recall that not that long ago, there was no Nature Conservancy or Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. As for strategy, first, let's secure the Deem Herbarium, and then figure a way to generate the necessary financial backing for a new organization, a new paradigm. As for the strategy, it's doable. Realize that it might take but one person, one philanthropist saying yes for this to happen, but we need to think outside the box. Since bench biologists are in control and here to stay, and they do not want us, the best way forward for botany and natural history may not involve university, at least not everywhere or as before, and almost certainly not here, I'm sorry to say. Whole organism field biology and taxonomically oriented work is practically dead at university. I realize this tradition bucking observation will cause some of you to balk, but that does not mean it's false or the advice unsound. The writing is on the wall. Let's not be ignorant. The longer we wait, the more difficult the task dealing with both environmental emergency and advanced discipline decline. Taking the counsel given by Dylan Thomas while here in Bloomington exactly 72 years ago this month, I will not go gentle into that good night, nor should you. What I suggest is doable and desperately needs doing. Success awaits the effort. May the force be with us, or in the spirit of tribalism, go team. Having used my allotted time, I will take any questions subsequently off podium. Thank you.